Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Responding to an Active Shooter Incident. Thanks so much for joining us today. We've got a full house, so we're going to wait just one more minute and let the last few trickle in. And while we're waiting, go ahead and use the chat box to introduce yourselves by agency and where you're joining us from. We've got people calling in from Texas City. Let's see. Wow. Georgia, West Virginia, Uxbridge, Mass, Louisiana, Arkansas. Keep it coming. We're going to give it one more minute. We've got a bunch of people joining in. All right. So again, hello and welcome to this PowerPhone webinar, Responding to an Active Shooter Incident. My name is Danielle Morphy. I'm the marketing manager for PowerPhone. Before we begin this presentation, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be made available after the presentation. To ensure the best possible audio experience, your mics have been muted. So if you have any questions, please use the questions tab on your webinar control panel. It's not the chat tab where you're introducing yourself. It's to the left of the chat tab. Feel free to ask any questions during the webinar, and we'll answer them at the conclusion of the presentation. So we're going to go over to the next slide just to talk a little bit about PowerPhone. For those who are not familiar with PowerPhone, I'm going to give you just a quick company snapshot. We leverage people, processes, and technology to empower public safety. And with nearly 40 years in the 911 industry, we have over 700 systems deployed worldwide, and we have 4 U.S. issued patents. We have also trained over 500,000 public safety telecommunicators. So now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to your presenters. Joe Lefebvre is an implementation manager for PowerPhone, and joining Joe is Chief Marc Montminy, the Chief Police for the Uxbridge, Massachusetts Police Department. Thank you both for joining us today. Welcome, Joe and Chief Montminy.
Thank you, Danielle, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Joe Lefebvre, and I am one of the implementation managers here at PowerPhone. My career in public safety has spanned about 26 years so far. I'm a retired firefighter paramedic from Massachusetts. That's kind of where I began. After leaving that role, I started working for the Uxbridge Police Department as a part-time dispatcher and kind of fell into the role, stayed there 15 years, working my way up to the lead dispatcher position. I have been an instructor for PowerPhone for about 10 years, and in 2019, I was promoted to the implementation manager role where I sit now. So I bring a lot of background experience, not only from the streets, but from the dispatch centers to my role and to today's webinar. And now it's my honor to introduce my former chief, Marc Montminy of the Uxbridge Police Department.
Hi, my name is Marc Montminy. I'm with the Uxbridge Police Department. I have no dispatch experience, but quite a lot of lived experience in the area of active shooter. I spent the bulk of my career in Manchester, Connecticut, where I was made chief in 2009. Unfortunately, a year later, 2010, we had a mass shooting in town where 8 people were killed and 10 people were shot at a local business. In addition to that, in 2012, I did the after-action report for the Newtown Police Department after the Sandy Hook shooting. Since then, I've lectured around the country, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Chief. Now, let's talk about our goals for today. Our goals for today's active shooter webinar is not about what the police officers are going to do tactically on the scenes. Today's our focus is what's going to happen in dispatch. As you all know or can imagine, when we deal with a mass casualty incident or a large weather-related incident or a large motor vehicle accident, things get very hectic and chaotic in the dispatch center. When we're dealing with an active shooting situation, it's that tenfold. So let's kind of step back and set up a quote-unquote typical day in dispatch. So let's imagine you're working your shift and we have 2 dispatchers on duty. Call volume is relatively light. There's no major events going on, no major weather events, no major MVAs. Your stress level is down here around a 2, and then all of a sudden everything lights up. All of your phones are lighting up, all of your 911 calls are lighting up. And Chief, I'll let you now talk about specifically what you went through with your shooting incident.
Sure. Well, what Joe just described is exactly what was happening to us. At one point, we're in Manchester, Connecticut, which is just south of Hartford. We have a 20-year veteran as our primary call taker. The dispatch center is set up, it might be a little bit larger than some of yours or perhaps a little bit smaller, but we had 4 dispatchers available on this date, and it's 7:15 in the morning. So the shift just got on at 7 o'clock. We have 1 call taker, 1 radio operator, 1 fire EMS dispatcher, and there's a supervisor who also can take a desk if need be. So that's the scenario. And this call, which is going to be your worst nightmare, comes in.
I need the cops here at Hartford Distributors right away, shooting.
What's going on? Who got
Somebody
shot?
got shot. I got shot.
Okay, I need some information, sir. Who
Somebody,
got shot?
we need the cops. What? Oh, shooting people. I just got shot.
Okay, I need to know what his name is.
His name is. He's a black guy. Get the cops here right away, please.
Sir, stay on the line with me. My
Bleeding
partner.
all over the place.
Okay. How many people got shot?
I don't know.
Okay, you don't know. And you're shot where?
In my head.
You're shot in the head?
Yeah.
And what's your name?
My name is.
Okay.
I
What's
think
that
I'm
medical
shot in
help? Who's the person shooting people again?
His name is. He's a black guy. He's wearing shorts.
Okay, black man, shorts, anything else? What kind of gun?
I don't know. I didn't see it.
You didn't see it. And where are you in the building, sir?
I'm hiding in an office.
Hiding where?
In an office. People are running all over the place.
Okay, I understand that, but if you keep talking to me, we can help you more, okay?
All right, yeah.
Okay. And you don't know if it was an automatic weapon or not?
He shot pretty fast.
Okay, and you're still. Are you bleeding a lot?
Yeah, there's people running all over the place.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I just see him running out. He's running away right now. He's shooting
running
at
away?
somebody else. Yeah, he's still shooting.
He's outside.
He's shooting at a girl.
Okay. How many people are down, sir?
Just
pick them up and say we're on the way.
He's still running after people. He's not leaving.
Okay, well, do you see what kind of gun he has, sir?
It's a black gun. I don't know.
Is it
He's carrying a red. He's wearing a blue shirt and blue shorts. He's got a oh shit. He's still shooting. I hear guns out there.
All right. Did he used to work there?
Yeah, till I just fired him.
Today?
Today, just now before he started shooting. He's chasing people out in the parking lot.
He's in the parking lot chasing people.
With his gun, shooting at him. He's got a he's carrying a red lunch bag. He's right out in front of my office right now. I see him walking around.
Active shooter. A red bag?
He's got a black shorts and a blue shirt. He's still walking around out in the parking lot.
Active distributors, 131 Chapel Road. We have a black male shooter. A lot of victims down. All right, where is he now?
He may be coming back into the building.
Whereabouts?
The side door.
Side doors that I face the building. What side?
Right by the flagpoles. The code to get in.
Right side of the flagpole.
Yeah, to the left of the flagpole. The code to get in is 0.
Wearing a red bag, blue shirt, blue shorts.
If the police, ma'am, Aaron, get in here.
Get in. Yeah, get in.
Get in here. Close the door.
Budweiser, beer distributor.
If they need the code to get in the side door.
All right. All right. Okay, sir. Stay where you are, all right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm guessing that's everybody's worst nightmare. And while this call is coming in the 30 or 45 seconds that call has taken, you can imagine that 911 is lighting up. So all of a sudden, we're getting multiple calls from that location. Everybody is starting to jump into action, including the fire department. Joe, can we have the next slide?
Yeah, and I think it's important, Chief, when you and I were discussing this, you made a note here that even through that, none of your dispatchers locked up. They started rolling with this as they normally do.
Yeah, and you know, regardless of your department, some departments are going to be bigger and some departments are going to be smaller, but I guarantee you, you're not staffed for this.
Excellent point.
So, so what's happened here is I'm going to play the first broadcast, and then we're going to go through the rest of this slide. So, Joe, can you play the audio for us?
All available units, 131 Chapel Road. 131 Chapel Road, an active shooting. That's 131 Chapel Road, an active shooting. One party shot in the head. We're getting further.
So that's the call that goes out. It's simulcast, so the fire department gets it as well. The fire department is starting to ramp up instantly. We're getting multiple reports of people down, and the fire department is going to do their mass casualty incident, which includes triage and all kinds of things. But you have to understand that at the moment, the facility is still unsecure. It's 30 seconds or 45 seconds into this call. No police officers on scene yet. It turns out that the first police officer gets on scene in 2 minutes and 57 seconds, but that's forever in dispatch time. So as the dispatch is listening and talking to these people on the phone, and they're begging for the police to get there, every second feels like an hour, I'm sure. So the facility is still unsecure. We have both ALS and BLS areas being set up by the fire department. In addition, an organization we call CMED, which is they handle our ambulance dispatches. CMED is now queuing up 20 ambulances, either heading to the scene or being redirected. So what's happened here is the shooter is an employee, or was up until an hour ago, was an employee. They caught him stealing, and the intent was to terminate his employment. So they had a meeting with him, his union rep, the manager of the facility, and the owner of the facility. So those four individuals had a meeting early in the morning before he went out. And the conversation was that we think that you've been stealing from the company, and it's our intent to fire you. He admits that he was stealing, and his employment is over. And everybody gets up from the meeting. The shooter walks into the adjacent office, which happens to be a kitchenette. And he picks up his lunch pail, which nobody thought was unusual. He opens the lunch pail and produces a handgun, and he immediately shoots the other three people. He is under the impression that all three were killed, but the owner of the facility was only grazed by the bullet. So he shot the others in the head, but the bullet grazed the individual you just heard on the call. And it's kind of unusual to have somebody call you up and say, hey, I just got shot in the head. Can you please send the cops? Usually you think of that as a fatal wound, but this individual was just grazed by the bullet. So everybody is en route, and so the chaos starts.
And that's a great word for that, Chief, because those of us in the dispatch world, once we get that initial notification out there to send as many units as we can, now it really starts to get hectic in dispatch, and we are immediately going to be overwhelmed.
So to further this chaos, what's happened is there are so many 911 calls coming in that the dispatchers can't pick them all up. And what ends up happening is after a certain number of rings, they're rolling over to the state police. And the state police at some point becomes aware of what's going on because they heard the regional broadcast, and they realize that all of a sudden Manchester's getting 100 911 calls and is not picking them all up. So they start taking the calls, and we're going to play you some of that audio in a second. But we've got units who hear the broadcasts from 20 miles or more away that all responded to the scene. So, initially we had nobody on scene for the first 2 minutes and 57 seconds. But because it happened very close to a shift change, we actually had 2 shifts of officers heading that way. So the midnight shift that had just gotten off at 7 o'clock and the morning shift that had just gotten on at 7 o'clock are both heading this way. And all the area towns around us are sending their units as well. Joe, can you play the call from surrounding towns?
Manchester PD, surrounding town, state police on the hotline, active shooting.
So
Hartford Distributors, 131 Chapel Road. We have a black male shooter. A lot of victims down.
So the hotline is what Connecticut calls their talk around channel. So it's a regional talk around. So by broadcasting over the hotline, they can contact all of our law enforcement neighbors. So everybody gets that. Everybody starts sending their people in that direction. And, one of the things, it's a blessing and a curse, I guess is what I would say, because what's going to happen is you're going to have more responders than you can handle, and you're not going to be able to control where they're going. So dispatchers are used to assigning the resources and directing the workflow, whereas in a situation like that, all bets are off. So, the comment I use to people when I give this lecture is that all your neighbors are coming to this party, and you're not going to be able to control who shows up and where they go and what they do. So, Joe, can you play the 911 transfer?
911, Manchester. This woman is at that distributor's in a closet. Ma'am?
Yes,
Where are you, ma'am?
I'm here, I'm here.
Manchester. She said he's headed towards the warehouse. His name is.
Right, we have that.
Okay, go ahead, ma'am.
Headed towards the warehouse inside the building, ma'am?
Yes.
Are you hiding?
Yes,
I need you to stay down where you are. Hold on 1 second.
So one of the interesting things is that what people do under such stress is very unpredictable. So we had people who had locked themselves in their office and climbed into the closet, shut the closet door. We had other people who ran out of the facility and tried to climb the 6-foot fence with barbed wire at the top. We had other people who hid in the ceiling tiles, above the ceiling tiles. And so you just never know what individuals are going to do. The first officers on the scene confronted an individual who was running in circles. He completely had no ability to flee the building or to take cover. So can we see the next slide, Joe?
Yeah, well, now what we're going to do, Chief, and thanks for laying out what happened there, and to translate it into dispatch, what's going on in dispatch, you hit on a lot of key topics of everyone coming to the party, the phones blowing up, and we are going to be overwhelmed. We are not going to be able to handle this. So in EMS terms, as a paramedic, we refer to this term called the golden hour. I'm sure a lot of you understand what that means, from the time a traumatic injury takes place to the time that patient is on an operating table, will give them the best chance of survival. In dispatch with an active shooting situation, we're not dealing with an hour, we're dealing with minutes, we're dealing with seconds. And this is really where seconds will matter. So let's talk about a term I like to call the golden minute. Within that golden minute, we need to effectively manage all of our resources. Now, as a dispatcher, part of our normal job is to understand where our units are, what units are in service, what units are out of service, who's out of town, what mutual aid companies are in town. We need to keep an eye, a track of that, but in this situation, it's going to be tenfold. Most of these shooting scenarios, they're over before we get units on scene. Things are going to happen very, very quickly. We get busy or we get into stressful situations. This is where our training and our muscle memory is going to take over. So having a framework already in place is going to help you get through this, because you are not going to have time to develop one on the fly. Whenever we get into those stressful situations, we always rely back on our training. And any of us that have been through a fire academy or a police academy or even a 911 academy, they always talk about muscle memory, and that's where your training kicks in. Well, unfortunately, with active shooting situations, none of us have been through enough active shooting situations to have developed that muscle memory. So it's really important to have those plans in place beforehand. Chief, anything to add to that?
I agree 100%. If you try to handle a scenario like this on the fly, you will fail. If you have it scripted out or had contemplated this beforehand, you'll be much more efficient.
Thanks, Chief. And just a quick reminder as we go through this, if any of you have any questions, you want to start throwing into that questions box, we're going to address those towards the end. So if any of the information we're touching on spurs a question, throw it in there now. We'll look at them towards the end. So let's get back to what's going on in dispatch. We now have, like the chief said, a lot of chaos going on. We have to control it. Everything is going to flow through dispatch. So right off the bat, you are going to get more 911 calls, more calls coming in than you can handle. Regardless of what your staffing is, you're going to be overwhelmed. And like the chief said, eventually we're going to be to the point where our 911 calls are now going to be rolling over to our secondary PSAPs. And prior to everyone understanding what's going on, what happens when you get a call bounced to you from another town? You can take the information. The first thing you do is you pick up the phone to that neighboring agency and you let them know that you just took a rollover call. Well, you're already overwhelmed with phone calls. Now you've got those piling in on top. You're also going to have those non-911 situations going on in your town. You may have those unrelated medicals on the other side of town that you're going to have to deal with. Eventually, because everyone lives in the scanner world, everyone's listening to us, the media is going to start to hear what's going on. Now they're going to start calling you, asking for information. Again, adding to that phone call situation. And unfortunately, some of our own worst enemies are our own staff. Our dispatchers that are off duty, our officers that are off duty, they're going to hear what's going on. And what are they naturally going to do? They're going to call dispatch to see what's going on. So we are going to be just tenfolding that amount of call volume that we can't already handle. Radio traffic is going to go through the roof. And as dispatchers, we are trained to listen to that radio. We need to listen to multiple radios. We're going to be overwhelmed. Okay, our senses are going to be overwhelmed. A lot of the units may be signing on that really don't need to be tying up our important radio traffic. We know everyone's going to that scene. Part of our job as dispatchers is accountability. We need to account for any of our officers, any of our resources that are going to these scenes. Initially, we just have to understand everyone that's available is going, and we're going to take care of accountability as soon as we can. So we're going through these calls, and we're trying to triage them and trying to cycle through these calls, answer the phone, get the information, hang up, go on to the next one as quickly as we can. But then we may hit a hard stop. You may have a victim on the phone. You may have somebody in the shooting trapped in the office, trapped in that building. What do we do now? We don't want to let them off the phone. So we're going to have to deal with that. And we're going to talk about dealing with those callers specifically in a few minutes. Again, you're going to have those unrelated calls coming in from out of town, or maybe even mutual aid calls coming in until they understand what we have going on. So we have to manage all of those resources. When we have those out of town resources coming in, they may not be able to communicate with us over the radio. You may have state agencies or even federal agencies in the area that hear what's going on, but they may not have your radio frequency. So what are they going to do? Pick up the phone and call us. Again, adding to that call volume. So we are going to be flooded on the phones. In addition to that, to make it even better, those of us that deal with walk-in traffic in the lobby, you may still have people coming in that lobby. All right. Hopefully it's going to be non-emergency issues that you can have wait, but you may have a legit emergency come into the lobby that you're also now going to have to deal with. Chief, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on a couple of the points that are up there. The first one, 911 calls are coming more than you can handle. That is exactly what happened to us. No one can staff for this level of activity. And certain people were exactly what you said. They were on the phone with individuals inside the building who could see the shooter. You're not dropping that call. And so what ended up happening is dispatchers who got the rollovers were extraordinarily helpful. Everybody in our area started to realize what was going on and the magnitude of it. So, for example, surrounding towns simply took our other calls. They didn't even ask. They just responded to anything that wasn't the shooting because they knew we had no other capability. So that's a good thing. We had 200 units signing on, completely unnecessary. The dispatchers eventually started just ignoring them. The same thing with signing off at the call. We'll go back later on and we'll pull the tape and we'll document all this at some other time. But right now is not the time. In addition, we had local media dialing 911 to try to get information. And as soon as they said who they were, dispatch was instructed to just hang up. Just hang up. We don't have time to answer questions from the media we're talking 2 or 3 minutes into the event, the media was calling because they monitor our frequency and they heard the call go out. And likewise, we had off-duty officers calling dispatch, trying to find out what was going on and getting more detail, none of which they had time to deal with. So the good news is many of our off-duty employees just came in. They just came in. So several dispatchers arrived at the station and started taking calls. We had one retiree who went to the front lobby and just took care of the front lobby. He just handled all the calls to the front lobby and all of the people in the lobby. That was his job, and he did it on his own. Officers self-responded from home, and even surrounding towns officers responded from home. So you can imagine the turmoil here and how many people we're talking about. So dispatch had a very difficult time communicating with all of these outside entities. It turns out dispatcher to dispatcher, they can easily communicate with each other, but dispatcher to another frequency is nowhere near as common. So what we had done is we had set up a staging area for arriving officers, but some of them even avoided the staging area and came directly to the scene. So, we went from having no one there to having 200 cars lining the road, 200 police cars lining the road in a matter of 5 or 10 minutes. The one other thing I want to mention, Joe, about the media, it turns out Manchester, Connecticut is about 30 minutes out from New York City by helicopter and 30 minutes out from Boston. And so within the first 25, 35 minutes of this event, media helicopters were hovering overhead to the extent that we had to declare no-fly zone because they were in such close proximity to each other.
Thanks, Chief. Now this brings us to our first poll question. Danielle, would you like to put that up, please, for our attendees? So our first question has to do with walk-in traffic. Does your agency do you at your agency have to deal with walk-in traffic? So you can go to your poll question and you can select your answer, submit your vote. We're going to calculate those and we'll talk about those in a few minutes.
Thanks, Joe. I did publish it, and you should all be able to see it under the polls tab. Feel free. We have about 42 votes, and I'll wait for your cue, Joe, to give you the results in a couple of minutes.
All right, great. Thank you. So we have the dispatch taken care of. We have units heading there, and now units are starting to arrive on scene. So let's go back to dispatch. What's now happening in dispatch? We're now starting to deal with the aftermath of this situation. Now that you have units on scene, your dispatch center is now becoming the information center for the world. Chief, I'm going to turn this over to you, these next bullet points, because they specifically have to deal with what you went through at your scene. So if you want to share with us how your dispatchers were dealing with now becoming that information center.
Right. So we ended up putting a public information officer at the scene and another at the PD. So the purpose of the one at the scene was to corral press into an area and give them updates every 15 minutes or every half an hour. Now, that has two benefits. The first benefit is it keeps the public informed, but also the press ends up staying put in a certain area, or else they'll miss the next update. But other press came directly to the PD, and so we ended up having to have a press information person in the PD. In addition, we put somebody in dispatch, where if dispatch got a call from press or anyone else, they could just pitch it to this particular phone number, and we had a non-dispatcher taking those calls. We happen to have a clergy team as well, so we sent part of the clergy team to the facility and part of the clergy team to the reunification center. So what ended up happening is the media was insane. We literally had the media over our heads. We had one media truck parked on the highway as close as they could to the incident, and then raised a 50-foot boom with a camera on top, trying to get photos of bodies on the front lawn. So the Victim Reunification Center, what we did is once we had the shooter down and we had the wounded cared for, we took everybody else out of that building and interviewed them, and then put them on a bus and bus them over to the Victim Reunification Center, which happened to be the Manchester High School. And the reason for that is August 3rd is when this happened. The school is empty. And so what we wanted to do was reunite the individuals with their family members at the Victim Reunification Center, not at the site. We didn't want more people coming to the site. Well, it turned out the press went to the Victim Reunification Center too, and tried to get grieving families on camera. So one of the things we realized is we hadn't properly planned for mass media as well as we should have. And that was a lesson learned. The lesson we took away from this was dispatch cannot and should not have to deal with international media. And we literally had Telemundo was there, Al Jazeera was there. Anybody who could get on a helicopter from New York City was there in 30 minutes, and the same thing from Boston. So we literally had over 200 members of the media on scene by the end of this event.
And Chief, we have a question that popped up. When you were referring to the media calling your center, were any of the media calling the 911 line, or were they calling on the business line?
They were calling both. So they didn't get an answer on the routine line, so they called 911. They're all desperate to get a snippet of information. And we understood that, but we simply don't. That can't be our primary function, nor can it be the dispatcher's primary function.
and the question follows up with, were any of those that called 911, were they charged with a misuse or abuse of 911?
We did not, but after the fact, we made it clear to them, we made it clear to their agencies what had happened, and explained to them that certain reporters, most prominently CNN, was not welcome back.
Very good. Danielle, do you have any results of that first poll?
I sure do. We had 53% of responders saying that they do have, dispatch does handle front desk walk-in traffic, and 47% does not.
So that's, pretty much, half of us that work in communication centers also have to deal with the walk-in traffic. And that can add a lot of stress to this type of situation, which hopefully will come into play down the line in helping your agency get better staffing. I know we are all understaffed, the nation as a whole, with dispatchers and police and fire and EMS are dealing with short staffing. But situations like this, like the chief said, you're not going to have enough staff to begin with. And now, Danielle, that actually brings us to our next poll question. So when we're talking about the public information officers, it was great that Manchester had one and actually more than one to send to different areas. What about your agencies? Do you have a public information officer? And if so, are they available 24/7? Are they in-house? Are they there? Can they be on vacation? So if you want to take a few minutes and answer that question, then we'll look at those results shortly.
Joe, while we're waiting for the poll, we had another question, if I could.
Sure, go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, the question is, does your agency use a mass notification platform to send emergency messages and texts and phone calls to the community? The answer to that question was not at that time. So this incident took place in 2010, and we did not have that technology at that time, but they do now.
Yeah, and I know a lot of agencies are going over to working with several, private vendors and platforms like that to get that mass information out there, whether it's through Red Alert or Reverse 911 or whatever they're using. It is important to get that information out there. So thank you, Christy, for that question. All right, so now this next slide, Chief, I want you to kind of just take this over. This is going to be more about visuals on your scene, and if you want to kind of walk us through what we're seeing here.
Sure. So the shooting took place at a location called Hartford Distributors. They are a Budweiser beer distributorship. And as you can see, there's tons of kegs and there's tons of cases of beer. And we culled the photos to make sure there was nothing terribly descriptive. But each of these photos shows something a little bit unique. The first thing is on the photo on the left, you can see that it truly is set up as a warehouse. So what ended up happening is after the initial shooting where the suspect shot his three co-workers, he then walked into the factory itself and continued to shoot people. Some of the individuals were individuals he didn't even know. So his goal, I believe at the time, was simply the biggest tally, the highest number of people killed. And you see the kegs that stacked on top of each other. One of the questions I had asked the people who were there, who survived, why did you not react to the gunfire? And the answer was, apparently when one of these kegs falls off and lands on the ground, it makes a sound very much like a gunshot. And all the employees who survived this thought that somebody had tipped over a keg, which makes perfect sense. The other thing, in the lower right-hand corner, the photo of the facility, the bottom of the facility, you can see a little bit of a outcropping. That's the office space. The rest of the building is all warehouse. But the one unique thing is the entire facility is enclosed with a chain link fence with barbed wire at the top. And of course, the reason for that was to make sure that people didn't come in and steal product. What the actual result of that was, however, is when people attempted to flee the building anywhere other than the front door, they were trapped in the parking lot by the chain link fence with the barbed wire on the top. One of the responding units saw a group of people trapped behind the barbed wire that couldn't get out, and simply drove his car through the fence. So he took the cruiser and just drove it through the fence, and it broke the fence down, and people crawled out underneath and were able to escape that way. So the tally on this shooting was 10 people shot, 8 killed, and 2 wounded, and one of the wounded was an older gentleman who had just returned to the facility from knee surgery, and he was shot 3 times and medevaced out and survived. The other people shot were shot at very close range, oftentimes in the head, and there was no viable patients inside the building. I just want to point out that this is in 2010. We had no rescue task force. For those of you who are familiar with fire tactics, there was no warm zone, and there were no prepared firefighters or EMS that went into the building. We brought the viable victims outside the building to be treated. The gunman, when police arrived in 2 minutes and 57 seconds, the first police officers arrived. The first officer finds a victim still alive on the front lawn and starts providing treatment. The officers that responded directly behind him forced an entry into the building and managed to corner the shooter in an office. And once the shooter realized that he was surrounded, he shot himself to death. So the police always have to be concerned about a second shooter or booby traps or whatever the case may happen to be. In this case, we found out after the fact that the shooter's vehicle was in very close proximity to our temporary command post. Had there been a bomb or something in that car, we would have been far too close. All these types of things are going on at the same time. And what I found out after the fact is that we had to debrief this because no one knew what everyone else's role was. And we included the dispatchers in the debrief because the dispatchers had a perspective that the officers on scene didn't have. The dispatchers actually talked to the victims who were bleeding out. The dispatchers were the key to this entire response. And sometimes, that's not what comes out in these after-action reports.
Thanks, Chief, for laying that out. And you're exactly right. This all goes through dispatch, and dispatch can be really affected by this. So what does this all mean to you and to your dispatch center? Well, you need to keep in mind that there is a person out there right now planning that next attack. So what are you doing to prepare yourself? If you have an active shooter dispatch, an active shooter plan in place now, does it include dispatch? If so, have you actually trained with it and gone through mock scenarios involving dispatch and actually running everything through dispatch? If you do not have a plan in place, the next few slides here, we're going to talk about some tools you may want to consider putting into your toolbox in developing that plan. So, as with everything we do in dispatch, we always need to remember that our actions are going to influence others. And it's very important that we remain calm and in control. Just like when we're training new dispatchers, your voice is a very important tool. You need to take control of conversations. When you are sound and you are in control, you put that confidence in your callers, they know that they're going to get well taken care of. When you're talking in your non-stressed voice, your officers understand that and they can focus on what they have to do. If you get out of control, your officers are going to pick up on that stress voice and it's going to add to their stress level. So as difficult as it is challenging, we have to remain in control. We need to assure the callers that everyone is working together to help them. If a caller can escape, we want them to escape. Before questioning those callers, ask, are they safe? Do they have an opportunity to escape? If they can't escape, let them go. But get their exact location and have them leave that phone line open, because now we have very good live interior audio intel on that particular room that they were in. Knowing what your officers do tactically when they deploy can help educate your callers. What you may or may not understand with the tactical deployments can be learned through actually taking part in a training. So if your department or one of your neighboring departments is doing an officer active shooter training, ask to be a proctor, ask to sit in on one and just view and see what happens. I had the opportunity to do that when I was a dispatcher with Uxbridge Police, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot of what happens when they first get on scene and how that can translate to me doing a better job in dispatch. And I took that information back and added it into our quarterly trainings for our dispatch staff. So we need to have those tools in place to help us navigate the chaos, but please keep in mind that having a tool is only part of the job. You need to train with it. You need to develop that muscle memory through that training. Chief, anything to add there with some tools they can add in?
No, I agree with you 100%. Getting back to my prior comment, if you don't plan on this before it happens, there's no opportunity to plan while it's happening. You'll be inundated.
Right. So let's talk about the calls coming in. Okay, we have a call come in. We know where we're going. We know where this incident is. We need to get more details. At PowerPhone, we have what we call the where within the where. We need to find out not only where the location is, but where they are within that location. Like the chief was pointing out with the slide on the beer distributor, it's a large facility. So we have a physical address. There's a lot of places in that facility where that shooter can be, where the victims can be. So remember to identify that location within the location. If we're talking about a school situation, be specific. What classroom are they in? If they're in a mall, what store, what department they were in. Also remember, ask if the caller has seen the shooter. If they have, where are they now? Are they stationary? Are they mobile? If they're mobile, what direction are they traveling? What department are they heading towards, or what office are they heading towards? It's important not only to identify where your victims and callers are, but also to give that tactical advantage to your officers. Chief, anything here?
No, I think I agree with everything you just said. One of the problems we had at this particular facility was the enormous size of the warehouse and no clear understanding of where the shooter was initially. It turns out that the shooter in this scenario had gone into a corner office and was actually watching the police response. We didn't realize he was there, but one of the officers was within probably 20 feet of him without realizing he was there. So it's critically important to know the where within the where. You can't just go to the facility and expect to find the shooter standing there waiting for you. If this individual had chosen to hide inside this facility, he could have literally hidden for a week. We would have taken a week to find him because of the type of structure it was. So, what we've done since then is we've asked them to label rooms, buildings, and parts of the buildings with numbers so the police know when they arrived. So particularly important with schools. They're going to call up and they're going to say, the emergency's in Mrs. O'Leary's kindergarten class, which none of us know where that is. It'd be much better if it was more readily identifiable with a number that was visible from the outside.
And I noticed in those audios at the beginning, one of your dispatchers had a great use of inverted visualization when they were asking about the door, and you mentioned a flagpole, and she immediately said, if I'm facing the building, where am I looking, left or right? And that is key as a great dispatcher question. Left and rights can be really confusing. We need to bring it to the perspective of those units arriving on scene. So when we're talking to these callers, we want to have some prepared instructions to give them, something to help them increase their chances of survivability. So as law enforcement is arriving, try to educate those callers that you have an opportunity to talk with. remind them to stay calm and follow the officer's instructions. If they have anything in their hands, usually cell phones, you want them to put them down because the officers will see things in their hands as a possible threat. Remind them not to make any quick movements towards the officers, and remind them that the officers, the first arriving officers, their job is to not tend to them and help their escape and tend to the wounded. Their job is to locate that shooter and stop the shooter. So don't let your callers run out to the officers thanking them for being there, because it could distract that officer and put them both in the line of fire. So the pre-arrival instructions to your callers on scene is important, not only for their safety, but for the officer's safety. Let's say we're talking with a caller and we identify that that caller is armed. They tell us that they have a license to carry it, and now they're carrying a firearm. What do we do with that information? That is very, very critical, important information. Now we need to get their description, get their exact location, and make sure your officers are aware that there is a person at this location armed. And let them know you have officers in that building. You may have officers that responded from home that are not in uniform. So it just heightened up that level of threat to the officers, and we want to make sure that everyone's aware of what's going on. Chief, anything to add here?
Yeah, so I want to mention that we had experienced a couple of incidences inside the building that mentioned that are specifically what you're talking about. So we had one individual who was on the phone with 911, who was barricading her office, and the dispatcher told her that the police were outside her door and please unlock the door for the officers, and she refused. We had other individuals who practically tackled the officers. We had one woman who refused to leave the officer's side. Once she came into contact with the first officer, she refused to leave his side. And of course, as you said, the officer's job was still to confront the shooter. He can't be involved in sheltering this one individual, but she refused. We had to literally drag her away. So all these types of things. We had the guy who was running in circles, and the officers determined that he was certainly not a threat, but he was ignoring officer commands. And that's another thing that you'll see when the stress gets this high, people just ignore police officer commands. So all that came into play. I mean, after, an hour after the gunman was down, we were still finding people secluded inside that building.
So it's important for us as dispatchers, again, to educate those callers, try to get their exact locations. So now let's kind of go back to the phone calls we're taking in. We're trying to triage and cycle through these calls, get them on the phone, get them off the phone as quickly as we can. But there's a very good likelihood that we could now be communicating with that shooter. And Chief, this is exactly what happened to you and at your scene. Could you give us the details on how that happened and what the outcome was?
Yeah. So what ended up happening is the gunman picked up an office phone. It was not his office. He just picked up a phone that he happened to see, and he dialed 911. And that 911 call ended up going to the state police, where a trooper handled it on the other end. The trooper calmly talked to this guy. He admitted that he was the shooter. He explained why he was shooting people. And he mentioned that he'd lost his job and so on and so forth. The trooper on the other end, who was acting as a dispatcher, did a great job in keeping him on the phone, trying to get him to put the gun down and turn himself in and so on and so forth. But the longer you spend on the phone, the longer you can engage the shooter when they call, the better.
Right, and like in that last bullet point there, the longer we keep them on the phone allows our officers to gain advantage, and it also gives victims a better chance to escape.
Yeah, because what you'll find out, Joe, is that a lot of these gunmen have no escape plan. In other words, they have no intention of getting away. They know that their life is going to end at this facility, and you can gain a sense of that when you talk to them on the phone.
Great point. This is almost like as dispatchers when we're dealing with a suicidal caller. Our job now is to buy time, and we want to build that time in there to hopefully allow those intense emotions to diffuse and let more people escape. So let's talk about after this at the aftermath again. So the shooter is contained. We're evacuating parties, and now in dispatch, we're starting to get that adrenaline dump. Okay, we're starting to catch up on things, and now we're starting to process exactly what happened. We have to think about our health and our mental health and the reality of critical incident stress. And you need to be prepared for that, because this is a very, very stressful situation. Just like there are many other types of calls we deal with, like the chief said, we're on the phone with those callers that may be bleeding out. We may be that last person that they talk with. We may hear them take their own life or have their life taken from them on the phone. So critical incident stress is a byproduct, or can be a byproduct, of being ill prepared. Having a structured call handling system is not only going to help you prepare for these calls, but help you stay focused during the call. Whoops, sorry about that. My apologies here. There we go. So you want to have a guide to help take the guesswork out. You need to stay focused and ask those most critical questions, saving time and lives. If you go through a situation like this or any critical call, that traumatic stress can creep up on you. And if you're not prepared for it and you don't know how to deal with it, it can result in a lot of bad health problems. So one thing to take away from this is traumatic stress is a normal response to an abnormal situation. Protocols and training that are used during routine training will help minimize that stress and allow you to stay more focused. If you find yourself having signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress, don't hesitate to reach out. Use a critical incident stress debriefing team. Reach out to your OEMS through your agency's EAP. We have many, many services out there now. We're probably going to talk about more about this in another webinar, but just understand that it's normal. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. This is normal, and there's ways to process that. Chief, anything to add in there?
I just want to mention that we included our dispatch team in all of our debriefs and EAP support options. Dispatchers were included, and I'm, in retrospect, I'm glad we did that, because the stress in that room sometimes is even worse than the stress on the street.
It is. It's very, very important to take care of ourselves. So now, how do we help ourselves? Well, if your agency has a plan in place, great. Make sure you train with it. Make sure you practice with it. If you don't have a plan in place, or you are a PowerPhone user, PowerPhone can certainly help through total response. This is an example up on your screen now. This is PowerPhone's active shooter procedure. This will help you through those critical seconds and minutes during an active shooting incident. And keep in mind, as with every single PowerPhone protocol or procedure, this can be customized, easily customized to meet your agency's specific SOPs and policies. So this, at the bare minimum, right out of the gate, this is going to help you navigate an active shooter situation, but we can also include everything specific to your agency. Chief, anything to add here?
No, sounds good.
All right. So in wrapping up our webinar, I'd like to now kind of look back at the questions. So if anyone has any questions, if you want to post them up, I'll kind of cycle through here and address the ones that we can see. Chief, I got a question here from Scott. Do you see that one?
Yes, I do. So Scott asks if our agency used encrypted radio channels. EMS and law enforcement channels are digitally encrypted to prevent scanner junkies and monitoring our traffic. At the time, we did not. At the time, we had the ability to encrypt, but it took a mechanism that we didn't have time to put in place. Since then, all of our communications is encrypted now. So yes, that was one of the takeaways after we finished. We ended up encrypting our radios, which, it doesn't just stop the scanner junkies, but it also, it puts a delay on the behavior of the media. They don't get the calls as quick as we do.
And Scott, that's a really good question, because a lot of agencies and ones I've worked with in the past would have tactical channels that could be dedicated to a scene like this. But again, going back to dispatch, we're aware those tactical channels are there, but we've never trained with them. We've never worked on a situation where, okay, we're going to switch to a TAC channel And now that dispatcher is in charge of that TAC channel. So it all goes, again, back to you may have those tools in place, but you really need to train with them to be familiar with them in a situation like that, especially with your part-timers. You may have a part-timer on the desk that doesn't always use all of your equipment. You need to work with that equipment every single day.
Yeah, Joe, I also wanted to point out that the minute you encrypt, oftentimes you knock your surrounding towns out too. As they don't know what's going on either. We had a situation where we provided our encryption key to our neighboring towns, but had that not happened, they would have been locked out as well.
All right. Well, that pretty much wraps up the questions we have here. Chief, I want to thank you again for your time today and all your help in developing this webinar. I think it's been really helpful, and I know it will help dispatchers in the future. Danielle, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Joe. As you know, this webinar replay will be emailed out to you today. Be sure to check your junk folder just in case it goes to that section of your inbox. We also have a multitude of resources on PowerPhone.com. You can look at our capabilities. You can view demos. You can sign up for a demo if you're not a PowerPhone customer. We're here to help you, and we are excited to help your agency succeed. So feel free to reach out to us and reach out to us if you have any questions. We really appreciate your time today. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, and thank you very much, Chief Montminy, for your input. It was powerful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.